The Caitlin Clark USA basketball situation is getting ridiculous because everybody is lying. The media, the players, the coaches, even Caitlin Clark. She's lying too. We'll get to that, but as you already know, USA Basketball released the women's roster for the 2024 Olympics and Caitlin Clark's name wasn't on it. This has caused an absolute war among fans and completely divided the nation. So much so that half of America is actually now rooting against their own country at the Olympics for not choosing Caitlin Clark. This is the biggest sports story in the country right now. When you turn on ESPN or any of these channels, they're not talking about the wnba finals that are happening right now. They are talking about the US Olympic roster. Not the men's, the women's, and specifically one player, Caitlin Clark. And to no fault of her own, is also the most controversial because the discourse around her is about everything but the basketball. The main reason Caitlin Clark was left off of Team USA had nothing to do with her talent or ability, it was because veteran players were concerned about her fans and how they'd react to her receiving limited playing time. Did they not take into consideration how fans would react to her not being on the team? That's the most pathetic excuse I've ever heard. If they just came out and said the reason she's not included is because they have 12 better players, then at least we'd be talking about the basketball. The people complaining about Clark being excluded would be comparing her to players that did get chosen. But they didn't do that. Nor did they choose the 12 best players, because Diana Taurasi in 2024 is not one of the 12 best women's basketball players in the world. Forget Caitlin Clark for a second, Orike Ogunbowale is averaging 26.4 points per game. That's the second most points in the WNBA this season. She was not selected either. So let's not pretend Team USA chose the best players, because they didn't. Diana Taurasi is 42 years old and in 2024 is not better than Caitlin Clark and a whole lot of WNBA players. Let's put the numbers on the screen. Caitlin Clark is averaging the same amount of points, more rebounds, more assists, shooting a higher percentage from free and from the free throw line. It's not just Taurasi, we can do the same for Kelsey Plum. She slightly edges Clark in points, but then Clark beats her in every other statistical category. Put Sabrina's numbers on the screen, it's the same thing. Again, Clark has the better overall stats, but I don't want to focus on Sabrina or Kelsey because they actually deserve to be there. Diana Taurasi does not. We've already heard countless instances of Diana Taurasi dissing Caitlin. I showed a bunch of them in my last video, but she's done it again. Because when asked about how she was able to make the Olympic team as a rookie and Caitlin Clark didn't, listen to what she said.
Weren't you named to the roster as soon as you graduated, right? You were young.
Yeah, after I won 3 national championships in a row, I was named.
What she said subtly was, yeah, I got picked when I was that age because I won 3 national championships in college, implying that her and Caitlin were incomparable because she won and Caitlin didn't, thereby insinuating that Caitlin Clark is a loser and that she, Taurasi, was way better than Caitlin at the same age. Let's look at the stats then and see how much better a rookie Diana Taurasi was compared to Caitlin Clark. Same points, less rebounds, less assists, less steals, less blocks, lower 3-point and free throw percentage. But Diana doesn't want to talk about the stats. She wants to talk about championships. Let's start with USA Basketball. Caitlin Clark has won 2 medals with Team USA at junior level, while Diana Taurasi at the same age led USA to their worst finish in the 21st century, meaning Clark had more international basketball experience and within the USA basketball system at that age than Taurasi had. But Taurasi doesn't want to talk about gold medals at junior level, she wants to talk about college championships. I'm sorry to break it to you, Diana, but winning a national championship at UConn is like losing your virginity to a prostitute. It doesn't mean as much, does it? What Caitlin Clark achieved at Iowa is a lot more impressive than Diana's titles at UConn, because the Iowa Hawkeyes have never won a national championship. Their only 2 Final Four appearances in the 21st century were with Caitlin Clark. Meanwhile, UConn won 3 titles with Taurasi, and they've also won 6 since she left. Breanna Stewart came around a few years later and won 4. They easily replaced her with a better player. How many years will it take for the Iowa Hawkeyes to have a better player than Caitlin Clark? Probably never. And I've not even talked about supporting cast. The only Iowa Hawkeye other than Caitlin Clark to make the WNBA was Kate Martin. She attended the WNBA draft to support Caitlin and ended up being surprised and getting drafted herself. Meanwhile at UConn, Diana Taurasi played with Sue Bird, a number 1 pick, one of the greatest players in WNBA history. She played with Swin Cash, who won 3 titles in college and another 3 in the WNBA. She also played with a bunch of other players who were first round picks in the WNBA. You cannot compare that to Caitlin Clark, who although never won the championship, in her final 2 years of college had to go through the South Carolina dynasty with Camila Cardoso and last year's number 1 pick Aaliyah Boston. They lost 3 games in 3 years. Clark also had to go up against the stacked UConn Huskies with future number 1 pick Paige Beckers, Aaliyah Edwards, who was a top 6 pick in this year's draft. She had to go up against the LSU Tigers, who won a title with Angel Reese. She's had some great battles with some great teams, and although she never won a title, she was able to beat all 3 of those teams in the tournament. And unlike Diana at UConn, there was no debate who the Hawkeyes' best player was. And she was also able to accomplish something Diana never could, and that was getting people to watch. For the first time in history, the women's Final Four got more views than the men's. The truth is, Diana Taurasi is a hypocrite, and she's only on the team for sentimental value, and so that she can win a record 6th gold medal. That's all this is about. The argument they're trying to make to justify her being there is that she's so experienced, and they need to have her on the team for her leadership. To that, I have a solution. Why can't she be a coach? Have her there on the bench in the locker room. There's no need for her to take up a roster spot, especially when that roster spot could be occupied by somebody who can provide what players like Diana Taurasi, Brianna Stewart and others have spent their entire career fighting for: growing women's basketball. As the oldest player on the team, if she's as committed to the cause as she claims to be, Diana Taurasi should be willing to sacrifice her spot on Team USA for the greater good of the sport. But she won't do that because she knows she's too old and she'll miss out on all the benefits that come with growing the sport. So now it's all about her and her record 6th gold medal. Speaking of growing the sport, let's point out another hypocrite, Dawn Staley, who led South Carolina to 2 championships over the last 3 years. Her team would have went undefeated back to back if not for Caitlin Clark dropping 40 and sending her team home in the Final Four and ending their perfect season. Anyways, Dawn Staley is one of 5 members on the USA Basketball Committee who has a say in who plays for this team. Take a listen to what she said after the championship game.
And I want to personally thank Caitlin Clark for lifting up our sport. She carried a heavy load for our sport, and it just is not going to stop here on the collegiate tour. But when she is the number 1 pick in the WNBA draft, she's gonna lift that league up as well. So Caitlin Clark, if you're out there, you are one of the GOATs of our games, and we appreciate you.
So she acknowledged that Caitlin Clark is one of the greatest of all time, credited her for uplifting the women's college game, correctly predicted that she would be the number 1 pick and uplift the WNBA too, but all of a sudden, when it's time to uplift the women's game on an international stage during the Olympic Games with the entire world watching, she doesn't want her to be there. What about Jen Rizzotti, another member of the US committee? Because she spoke up publicly and said, quote, "It wasn't our job of the committee to decide how many people would watch. It was our job to create the best team." That would have been a solid response, until she ended up telling on herself by saying, quote, "When you base your decision on criteria, there were other players that were harder to cut than Caitlin Clark because they checked a lot more boxes." Let me prove to you why she's lying.
Liar!
By her saying other players were harder to cut than Caitlin Clark, she's essentially saying Clark wasn't even close to being picked, and if the roster was 15 players instead of 12, she still wouldn't have made it. If that's the case, and there's so many other players that would have made it ahead of her, explain why 14 players were invited to training camp, 12 of them are on the roster, and Caitlin Clark was one of 2 that got cut. Who are the other players that checked more boxes than Clark? Whoever they are clearly didn't check enough boxes to get invited ahead of her to training camp in the first place, so how do they check more boxes now? And I wonder, does this mean that Caitlin Clark is no longer the first reserve if someone gets injured and can't play for whatever reason? Because it's been widely reported that Caitlin Clark is the first replacement, and she said in an interview she'd be open to playing, but these comments make me wonder if that's even true. because they're just making it up as they go along. Another reason I've heard she didn't get selected was because she didn't attend the USA basketball tryouts, and that head coach Cheryl Reeve hasn't been able to train with her. Yet again, that doesn't make any sense, because the reason Caitlin Clark couldn't make the tryouts was because she was too busy playing in the Final Four of March Madness growing the sport. They obviously knew the tournament was going on, and as last year's finalists, there was a very good chance Iowa would go far and Clark wouldn't be able to attend. So why invite her other than to use her absence as a reason to not include her? Cheryl Reeve is lying. It's got nothing to do with Clark not being at practice. It's obviously because she feels some type of way about Clark getting all the attention, because she's tweeted about this on her social media, complaining that her team, the Minnesota Lynx, weren't getting any coverage because the WNBA was promoting Caitlin Clark, as if it's a crime for a league to promote their most popular player. Everybody is lying, even Caitlin Clark lied. Of course, Caitlin didn't make any crazy controversial comments when asked about being left off the team. She didn't call anybody out or start a conspiracy, she kept it professional and said that there's no disappointment at all.
Honestly, no disappointment.
Which obviously isn't true, because her coach was with her when she found out she didn't make the team and told a different story about how Clark reacted.
She got the call on the bus and she texted me to let me know, and I just tried to keep her spirits. I mean, the thing she said was, "Hey coach, they woke a monster," which I thought was awesome.
And if she really wants to play, she does have some leverage, because Caitlin Clark is eligible to play for the Italian and Irish national teams because of her heritage. Clark could theoretically say at the peak of her popularity, she wants to play international basketball right now to grow her personal brand on a global stage, and therefore is willing to commit to either one of those two nations. This would make things complicated for Team USA, because once she plays for a different country, that's it. And not only would USA Basketball be losing the future of their program, if Clark goes on to be the all-time great we all expect her to be, the national team she represents would become a threat to the US national team. Not to mention long term, the impact she would have on that country. 20 years from now, a whole generation of Italian or Irish girls would have grown up wanting to be Caitlin Clark, and all of a sudden the US national team, who have won every Olympics ever, would have a serious competitor. Obviously we know Caitlin's not the type to throw her weight around, but somebody could do it on her behalf. Do you know who sponsors USA Basketball? It's Nike. Do you know who just signed Caitlin Clark to a $28 million deal? Nike. She's the face of Nike basketball for women, and it's well known in the men's game that Nike have a massive influence on USA Basketball, so much so that players sponsored by rival brands have been left off the team in the past. And we've even seen things like this in the men's, where players wearing Adidas shoes have been intentionally hidden from team photos. I'm sure Nike, who are paying big dollars to sponsor USA Women's Basketball, want as many jerseys sold as possible. Can somebody tell me one USA jersey that would outsell Caitlin Clark's? Are we forgetting Caitlin Clark has a signature shoe on the way? Tell me a bigger stage for Nike to roll out the biggest signature shoe in female basketball history than during the Olympic Games representing Team USA. Since that's not gonna happen, I've got an idea. Why doesn't Clark debut the shoe in Ice Cube's Big Free League? Now that Clark isn't playing for Team USA at the Olympics, she's got some time off this summer, so she could play in the Big Free and get that bag from Ice Cube and promote her new shoe. And we'll very quickly find out if Ice Cube's Big Free players are more appreciative of all the attention and coverage than the WNBA players are. Some people actually say the reason she declined the offer to play in Ice Cube's league was so she could play with USA at the Olympics. So not only is Clark missing out on a big opportunity, she's missing out on money too. What people need to understand is basketball is a sport, but professional basketball is entertainment, and entertainment is a business. A concept as old as time is if you put the best athletes on the court against each other, people will pay to watch it. In regards to women's basketball, that isn't the case. Despite being dominant, winning 6 gold medals, losing 1 since 1996, USA women's basketball hasn't moved the needle, not in terms of television ratings or attendances. And by the way, at the Olympics you're not just competing with countries within your own sport, you're competing with other sports too. You need to give people a reason to watch the basketball over all the other sports that's going on, and Caitlin Clark is that reason. The bottom line is she's bigger than basketball, and now because of all the hypocrisy and circumstances of this situation, people are actually going to boycott and less people are going to support and watch USA this summer because she's been excluded. The women's national team had a chance, perhaps for the only time ever in history, to be watched by more people than the men's. I don't know if they could have pulled it off, but Caitlin Clark would have given them a real shot. Could you imagine what it would do for women's basketball if more people watched the women than a team that includes LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant and all the NBA stars? That would have made a real statement. USA Basketball made a different statement, and to be honest, it's pretty revealing. They captioned the photo by saying this is a movement, not a moment, which I interpret as them saying, we've been here doing this long before Caitlin Clark was here and we ain't going nowhere. Because what else could possibly be a moment other than all the hype that has came as a result of Caitlin Clark? The most frustrating part about all this is it was so easy. They didn't even have to say she was there for marketing purposes. Everybody knows that. They could have easily said, we see Caitlin Clark as a big part of USA Basketball going forward, especially in 2028 and beyond. We want her to experience international basketball, be around the vets and legends of the game. But they're not going to do that. Why? Because that would then force them to admit that Caitlin Clark is the face and future of women's basketball, which everybody can admit besides the WNBA players. The same WNBA players who are now playing in sold out arenas, chartering private flights instead of flying economy, and are all over TV because of her. Do they not understand the missed opportunity that if you put the best players in the world on Team USA and Caitlin Clark is there, all these people that are there for Caitlin Clark will also get to see the best other WNBA players and potentially become fans of them? I'm sorry, but Caitlin Clark just has to be on that Team USA team, and I still believe somehow, some way she will be. But they've handled this situation so poorly that even if she is included, it's going to be even more controversial. What it all comes down to is the fact that USA Basketball are more concerned with people's feelings and things being fair than the greater good. And that mentality is what's been and may continue to hold back women's sports for years. Because life isn't fair. Business especially is cutthroat, ruthless. You have to make difficult decisions and you can't be afraid to upset people. If you choose to prioritize the feelings of an individual, somebody like Taurasi, who probably does deserve to break the record for all she's done, and she would feel hard done by if robbed of the chance of doing so. But if you continue catering to people like her and what she wants, instead of the fans and what they want, you'll always find yourself stuck trying to figure out why nobody cares. Tell me down below in the comments, should Caitlin Clark be on this Team USA roster? If so, why? And who should she replace? If you've made it up to this point in the video, I'm sure you'll enjoy this video on the screen right here. Click it. And on that note, it's DKM signing out. Until next time, and peace.